So today I am not going to be giving a Dhamma talk. Today I will be talking about Bhante. As you all know, he passed on at some point in the night, and this is just going to be an exploration of his life, an understanding of where he was, how he came into this life, and some other things. So there won't be any questions, because what I'm about to tell you will definitely bring up a lot of questions. But I will not answer them. This is where we go into the twilight zone, because we're going to be talking about things that don't have to do with the meditation, that don't have to do with practice directly. It's just about Bhante, and it's just about the paramis that he's developed throughout his life and throughout his past lives, and my interactions with him, and the understanding of who he was as a person, who he was in previous lives, and what has happened now. Wow, it's so fast. It's amazing. So, Bhante has had a connection to the Dhamma, not just in this life. He has had it over many, many lifetimes. A majority of his lives he has spent in the higher Deva realms, in the realms of those Devas that depend upon other Devas' creations, and in the realm where Devas create for others, and into Sita. A lot of time there. But Bhante has also had a lot of human lives, a lot of human existence throughout the different eons. I asked David in the car, how far back do you want me to go? And he said, how about 250 lifetimes? Oh, okay. But one of the more significant lives that he had was as a person during the time of Kassapa Buddha. And during the time of Kassapa Buddha, at that time, Bhante was not a he, but he was a she, and a noble woman who was introduced to Kassapa Buddha's teachings. And after being introduced to those teachings about sila, about precepts, about the benefits of precepts, about how the precepts protect you in that life, that being became a lay follower. And being a noble person, not in the sense that that being had an attainment, in the sense that they were wealthy and very well-to-do, they decided to become a supporter, or she became a supporter of Kassapa Buddha. And she became a long-time lay follower of Kassapa Buddha. From there, that faith grew in the Dhamma. That's how it started. That there is something that can take you all the way through to the end of suffering. The seed, the very beginning seeds were planted of how this process could work. And later on, that lay follower had a chance to go to Kassapa Buddha, go to the disciples of Kassapa Buddha, listen to Dhamma talks, and all those times get those formations, those sankharas of faith in the Dhamma. And that is a strong thing, faith in the Dhamma. Just upon listening, there was this very immense conviction that there is something here, even though that being didn't fully understand what was going on. In terms of a lay follower, they understood a few things: precepts, and being a good person in terms of being a good employer, so to speak, and so on. And then from there, they attained one of the 6 sensual heavens. And the first heaven that they attained was Tusita. There in Tusita, that being was able to interact with Bodhisattva. From there, they went back down into the human realm. And that being later on went on to become a king. And as a king, was very, very wealthy and very generous to his people. And the generosity that he had and the understanding he had about generosity started to develop, because he understood by being generous, the kingdom flourishes. And he was also strict in his generosity, in the sense that he expected nothing less for his subjects. He understood that his subjects, the people that he took care of, were the utmost priority. He was very responsible for them. From there, he continued on into a new human existence as a wanderer, as an ascetic. And as an ascetic, he didn't have Buddha Dhamma at the time, but he was in search of truth. He started off as a businessman, as a merchant. And as a merchant, he understood the value of being truthful and honest in one's dealings. And so he developed satya. He developed the understanding that if I am truthful and honest, then others will also be truthful and honest with me. But he was not satisfied. And that is why he gave up. Towards midlife, towards the middle of his life, he gave up the role of being a merchant to his children. In other words, he gave the business to his children. And he went away into the forest. And in the forest, he encountered different kinds of wanderers. He became a yogi. He studied different kinds of philosophies. And that's when, at one point, I met him. And together we discovered and learned about different yoga practices, about different techniques, about different meditations. And we were able to get to the first jhana, and we were able to get to the second jhana. And from there, we went into the Brahmalokas, the first Brahmaloka, and then the second Brahmaloka. Now, Bhante and I have shared different kinds of relationships throughout the lifetimes. In some lifetimes, he was a great father. In some lifetimes, he was a great grandfather. Sometimes he was the cool uncle. Sometimes he was an older brother. And sometimes he was a son. And in all of those lifetimes, we had a wonderful relationship, a wonderful understanding. And together we learned how to develop our ethics. We learned how to develop our generosity. And he continued being a wanderer for a long time, many, many different lifetimes, wandering in caves, in the forests, at the root of a tree, and so on. So we went into the first Brahmaloka, went into the second Brahmaloka, came down into different Deva realms. He spent a lot of time, as I said, in these three first. Tusita, the realm where Devas create for other Devas, and then the realm where Devas rely on the creations of other Devas. And oftentimes he was somebody who expected to be treated a certain way, because he had that sort of royalty about him. He had this sort of idea that he was destined for something great. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't conceit, it was just the way his formations had developed. Later on, he encountered the Buddha. And how he encountered him was as a little child. He saw the Buddha and he was amazed by the Buddha. Didn't have to say anything. Just saw the Buddha and was, wow. 8 years old at the time. He was so inspired by that image that later on he continued doing other things. He was a merchant again. He was a tradesman, a craftsman. And later on, he actually encountered Sariputta. And when he encountered Sariputta, Sariputta said a few words to him about impermanence, about dukkha, and about not self. And he was inspired by that. And so he became a monk. And he became a follower of the Buddha, a monastic follower of the Buddha. And if you read Digha Nikaya 33 and 34, he was one of the monks there, listening to the enumeration of the Dhamma by Sariputta. Even though the Buddha was his teacher, or the Buddha was the one who gave him the Dhamma, he always considered Sariputta as his teacher. And from understanding anicca and dukkha and anatta, and going into the homeless life and meditating, he attained the different jhanas. And from attaining the different jhanas, he then experienced stream entry. Then from there, he had many different lifetimes. So he had different lifetimes where he was again a Tavatimsa Deva, a Tusita Deva. And then in the last 100 years, he had a couple of human lifetimes. Then when he came into this life, he was born a Sotapanna, a stream enterer. That's why throughout his life he was always seeking something. His whole life was dedicated to the Dhamma from the get-go. He had no other goal in life as such. Yes, he lived as a carpenter, he did different kinds of things, he earned his money, he did all kinds of things like that, but he remained dissatisfied. He knew that there was something more. And then when he was introduced to the Dhamma by reading the Manual of Insight and other kinds of texts, meeting with great different practitioners like Dipama or Mudindra or Upandita, right, or Usilananda, who he considered a great person, he got inspired. And then later on, he did many, many, many years of practice. You might have heard him say before, I've done 20 years of suffering so that you don't have to. Right? He did all kinds of insight practices and vipassana practices. Now, he was a very interesting character because he was also very straightforward, right? And while he was practicing, he realized that this really isn't getting me anywhere. The teachers that he was with told him, okay, you've gotten to this stage, you're done with the practice, there's nothing else for you to do now. We've taught you all we could. It's very similar like the Buddha. But he realized, no, this can't be it, because I don't feel the change. I don't feel the things that are talked about as characteristics of somebody who has experienced some kind of a shift. So there was somebody who suggested to him that, why don't you go back to the suttas? And that was Bhante Punaji. And so he went into the cave, right? You know this story. He went into the cave with the Majjhima Nikaya and started going through it. While he was in that cave, he started experimenting with how this process works and the idea of tranquilizing bodily formations. And he tried it out for himself in different scenarios. He relaxed and tried to figure out what that means to tranquilize, to relax. And then he started to develop the practice of the 6 R's. At that time, it was not the 6 R's. At the time, it was just, how do I do this practice? Now, because of all of the different lives that he spent pursuing the Dhamma, right, the merits that he received, the karma that he received, as being somebody who was generous towards the Dhamma, as somebody who offered land to monks so that they could build a monastery and stay there, as somebody who offered food and alms to monks and even to Kassapa Buddha. He had the generosity, he had the sila, he had that protection. And now he was developing samadhi in this life to the utmost. But he realized in trying too hard, it only caused more craving. And that was the insight that he received. That craving is essentially tightness and tension. And if I just relax tightness and tension, that is the end of craving. But I have to keep doing that. I have to keep recognizing and noticing the craving and let go of it. And he faced a lot of criticism for it too, right? Talking about mindfulness in this way, understanding what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is remembering to observe how mind's attention moves from one thing to the other. Not a lot of people got that. Not a lot of people understood that. Their idea of mindfulness was completely different. You know, the idea of just letting go and relaxing. Now, for us, it seems like the norm. It seems like this is amazing. It seems like this is the way. And it is. But he faced a lot of backlash for it too. He did have a lot of support, but he also faced a lot of backlash. Now, all of you have had different experiences with Bhante. All of you have had different relationships with Bhante. You know, he was very, as I said, direct and to the point, right? And some people were scared of him. You know, he would say, "Don't make me bring out my stick." How many of you heard of that? But that was only because he cared about us. He was such a teacher that this is again something cultivated through many lifetimes as being a teacher. That he realized that there was a balance between compassion and trying to do the effort for the student. It would seem like he was very invested in our practice, and he was, but at the same time he understood that the student has to walk the path. So whenever he was stern, whenever he might have been seemingly angry, it was just for that moment. He never fumed and hummed and hawed. He never took anything personally to the extent that, why is this person not behaving this way? Right? He just was very direct and said, you're doing it wrong, do it this way. Why haven't you sat for 3 hours? Didn't I tell you to sit for 3 hours? Yeah. Or take a break, go down by the lake. Now hopefully it's not Lake Hannah, which is like 20 miles away. But he was somebody who was very gentle also. And to me, he was like a teddy bear. Very soft, very gentle. My experiences with Bhante in this life have been very few, actually. My one-on-one time with him has been very few. I remember when I saw Bhante the first time on YouTube, I was trying to figure out what he's talking about. Right? I was experimenting with jhanas through the scheme of the Yoga Sutras. And I tried to apply what he was saying in his discourses. And a lot of the stuff that he was reading from the suttas didn't make any sense to me. But I started following it and I said, oh, this is interesting. He's talking about letting go and relaxing. He's talking about creating an openness rather than becoming too focused. Because just by listening to that and going back into my sits, where before I was becoming one-pointed, and I was enjoying it, but I realized that I wasn't receiving the insights that a lot of people talk about. I wasn't receiving the clarity that a lot of people were talking about. And if I just shifted a little bit and relaxed, then I went even deeper. And I remember listening to this audio of his about relief and talking about all of the different stages of meditation and then talking about Nibbana. It was the first time I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And this was back in 2015.
That was the relief?
The relief video. It was amazing. And amazing edits too, by the way. Because the way he explained it was like, this is what happens, and then this is what happens, and then relief. You know, if you just go back to that video, that audio, it's amazing. It's so inspiring. And so I looked Bhante up, and I looked up that he had a place here. At the time I was in San Diego, so I couldn't really travel. I just wanted to finish up my work and just stay in one place. But I looked for any retreats that were being done online. Obviously at the time Bhante wasn't doing any online retreats. And so I said, okay, who's the next best person that I could learn from? And then I saw these interviews between Bhante and a guy named David Johnson. So I was like, oh, this guy probably knows it too. So I looked for what was the best available option to register for a retreat with David Johnson. I couldn't find one that year. I was like, I'm not going to do a retreat unless it's with David Johnson. So the next year, or a few months later, there was an opening for a retreat, an online retreat. And so I signed up, registered, and did that retreat. And at the time, while I was doing the retreat, I was listening to the Dhamma talks that are there for those retreats. And I was listening to Bhante's words, still unable to really clearly understand what he was talking about, especially dependent origination. That went way over my head. No idea what that was. But the jhanas, that was very interesting to me. I wanted to explore what he was talking about there. So I actually re-listened to 111 over and over again, really trying to understand it. And because I had a very fortunate situation where I could be on retreat while I was at home, I meditated for as long as I could. Right? And so I had the different experiences and went through the jhanas, gave my reports to David and told him this is what happened, this is what happened. And I didn't realize that he was actually sharing some of my reports with Bhante, because then he said, you know what, Bhante said this. I was like, oh, that's cool. All right, let me try this. And it went on from there. Then I think later on, after the end of that retreat, David had a chance to come to San Diego. And that was the first time I met him. I was like, wow, I'm meeting the teacher in person. Right? So I met him. I met with Mark and Antra. And we had a good chat. We had a good lunch. And I think it was probably January or February of that time. And David was like, you know, Bhante's coming to California. It would be great if you come and spend some time, because, you know, he's doing a retreat here, and it'll be the first couple of days where he's not going to be doing interviews, so that'll be perfect for you to get a chance to talk with him. I said, cool, that would be great. So we set it up, and this was the Easter retreat of 2018, I think it was, and or 17 probably, anyway. So I went to the first day of that retreat, not knowing what to expect, and I sat in the back, waiting for Bhante to come in, and in he comes with his walking stick, and as soon as he just walks out, I felt like this burst of energy, and I was like, whoa. I was like floored by that. I was like having a trip, you know. I could see this energy around Bhante. I was like, wow, that is amazing in my mind. Right? Maybe I was kind of starstruck, because this is the first time I was seeing Bhante in person. But regardless, when he sat down and he started talking, he talked about the instructions, and I was just listening to him, and I was vibing with him. You know, I was just feeling all of this loving kindness from him and from myself, giving it to him, and it was just this dance of loving kindness that was going on. It was amazing. And then the next day, I was waiting to see when I could talk to Bhante, and it was just about before lunch. So I got a knock on my door, and David said, "You ready?" I said, "Yeah." So we went down the hall, and there was this room there. We went in there, and there were three people. There was David, there was Venerable Basa, and there was Bhante. And I sat down, and he said, "So, how are you?" And I started laughing. And that was a great conversation. That was the first time we actually exchanged understanding of Dhamma. He asked me a lot of very intricate questions about Dhamma. He asked me about consciousness. He asked me about formations. He asked me what happens in this jhana and what happens in that jhana. He asked me a lot of very detailed things. So what happens in your mind? What goes on in your mind? I explained, this is what happens. How do you see karma? You know, what is emptiness? All of these different, very, very complex questions. And it was a lot of fun. You know, I wasn't nervous at all. I was just happy to be there with Bhante and David and Venerable Basa the first time I met her there. And he then asked me, what do you plan to do? Like, what are your plans for the future? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I'm just doing whatever it is I'm doing. And he says, do you have an inclination to teach? And I said, I have, but I haven't really thought about it. But with your permission, I would like to teach. And he said, you have it. You know, and he said, your understanding is so good that when people listen to you, they will be convinced that this is the path. So we discussed, you know, what would be the ways to teach, or how I could start and things like that. And it was a very slow start. So I was doing online guiding, sending emails, things like that. And I didn't see Bhante for some time. It wasn't until a few years later that I saw him. So during the pandemic, Bhante was in India, and so was I. However, I didn't have a chance to actually meet him because I was up in the Himalayas doing my thing, as I do. And he was in Goa. But I do remember seeing him one time giving a talk. And he looked very tired, and he looked, very kind of sick as well, because it was a long time being cooped up in one place. And then I went back to Cambodia, and then there was an opportunity for me to come see Bhante. Actually, David sent an email and he says, Bhante would really like to see you. Can you come and see him? And I said, sure, that would be great, but when? And we went back and forth, and we finally came up with an idea of coming in September of 2021. So I had only seen Bhante then in 2017 or 18, let's say. And then again in 2021. And that was very interesting. So I was, so I landed late night in September. I think it was late September, something like that, 2021. And David drove me from the airport to the center, and we went down, and I saw Bhante in his cabin. And I said, oh, cool, can we meet Bhante now? And David said, maybe tomorrow would be a better day, because he was busy on his computer playing blackjack. Sorry, solitaire. Oh, he loved that game. So the next day, I think it was, maybe it was that morning that we had a chance to actually meet and talk. So David said, you ready? I said, yeah. And that time I was staying in the big cabin down there, which is now called Nirodha, but was at the time called Brahma Vihara. So he took me to Bhante's cabin, and I sat down on the chair. Yeah. And here Bhante comes down, down the steps, and I see him, and I stand up, and then he sits down, and I sit down. And he looks at me and he says, you don't bow? And then I said, oh, yeah, that's right. So I stood up and I bowed. I asked him, how do I bow? What's the best way to bow? And he said, okay, this is what you do. And then I bowed 3 times and then sat back down. And we had a good chat. After that, he talked to me about the book that I was working on at the time, which was the first drafts of the dependent origination books. And he said, I've been reading your books, and I was surprised to hear that. I didn't realize that he even had time to read my books. But apparently David was giving him copies of the books that I had sent him. And he had thoroughly read them, because he was talking about very fine points about, when you talked about this, what do you mean by that? We talked about the more refined points about the Janagami and what happens, somebody attains stream entry and then goes to the first Brahmaloka and things like that. And he asked me, how have you been? How is your meditation going? Have you developed any insights? Have you developed any faculties? And we talked about that a little bit. And he said, he only had one note for me for that whole series of books. He said, there's just this one thing I want to tell you. There was this one thing you wrote there, which was about the smile. And you said, when you smile, when you come to this point, you can smile mentally. He said, I would just change that to say you actually smile physically as well. I said, okay, sure, that's fine. And since then, he didn't really say anything else about the books. And then we met the next day, we talked about other things, and he said, so, do you want to become a monk? And I said, I have some things going on, so I have to see, because at that time, I didn't know it yet, but my dad was really sick. And I was just waiting to hear back on what was going on with him. And he said, okay, well, no pressure, just asking. And we started talking about other things. We started talking about dependent origination. We started talking about nibbana and nirodha. And then the next day, the retreat started, the September retreat. And at the time, Venerable Metananda was there. So Bhante and Metananda would do this kind of ritual where they would ask for forgiveness from each other. And that was a wonderful thing. And I would just observe that and everything. And then I would sit there. And then the next morning he asked me, so, what have you decided? Are you going to become a monk yet? I said, I'm still waiting to hear back on what's going on. I just found out my dad's been diagnosed and all of that, so I just have to figure that out. He said, okay, no problem. And then when he was doing the interviews, I was just with him, listening to what he was doing, understanding what he was doing, because at every interview what he would do is he would radiate loving kindness, right, just to push the person along. But you know what Bhante's favorite Brahma Vihara was? It was equanimity. He loved to be in equanimity all the time. He loved to radiate equanimity. Anyway, so I was with him during the first series of interviews, and in the interim between one person and the next person, he would share stories with me about his time in Burma, about his time in Sri Lanka, about his experience with Usilananda, things about like what Usilananda taught and what he thought about certain things like dependent origination. And then we went really deep into understanding Nibbana. And I said, this is the way I look at Nibbana, and this is the way I would say a person would experience Nibbana. And he would look at me very quizzically, and he said, I have to think about that for a moment, because he realized that there was something a little off there. And he was trying to make, assessments of if it made sense or not. And he actually took time to consider it. He was a very, that's why I said he was like a teddy bear. He never really shouted at me. Never shouted at me at all, at one time. Just that one, you don't bow. That was it. But otherwise we shared it was like being with my grandfather. That's what it was like. And it was very chill, very relaxed. And, every time we would go out for lunch, I would order something and he would order something, and he would keep giving food from his plate to my plate. Hey, try this out. Have a little bit of this. I'm not hungry anymore. Why don't you eat this? And we would talk about Dhamma. We would talk about different things. And then we were at the Abbey one time. And while we were at the Abbey, he ordered whatever he ordered, and I ordered whatever I ordered, and we were eating and talking. And we were talking about dependent origination, and he said, I'm still skeptical about what you're saying about Nibbana, because Nibbana cannot be experienced as a consciousness, because all consciousness is dependently arisen. So how could you experience Nibbana? And it was a very good question. Of course, it was a question out of the blue, because in every moment he was testing me, He thought I didn't know, but, I was on to him. You give a little poke here, a little nudge there. Does he get disturbed here? Does he get agitated there? What's going on? Those kinds of things. And I said, yeah, well, if you think about it, there is the contact that is empty and void and so on. And he didn't really say anything. He said, okay, let's have, okay. And that was when there was ice cream to be had, right? So everybody was like, yeah, I'll have this ice cream, I'll have that ice cream. And we asked, do you want some ice cream, Bhante? And Bhante said, no, I'm okay. So David actually went to the ice cream section and he got Bhante some ice cream. It was like cheesecake or something like that. Anyway, so while we were eating ice cream, we continued talking about this, and we went back and forth, and people thought we were debating, but we were just having a conversation. And we were just talking about, well, if you think about it this way, if you think about it that way, Nibbana is understood in this sense, and it's not within the realm of dependent origination. And he said, there was somebody else who thought about it like this, a Burmese monk, and it's in the commentaries in this way. So how could you? So it felt like to other people who were there that we were debating, but we were just having conversation together. And finally I was talking to him, and he finally said, isn't this ice cream really good? Just to change the topic. I said, yeah. And so we stopped talking after that. We just had some ice cream. And later on, I had to leave because that was the end of my time here at Dhamma Sukha in 2021. And we met a couple more times, and he actually took me into his cabin. The first time I went into his cabin, and he was sitting there, and it was like I was sitting with Master Yoda. Because if you go into that cabin, it's like that little hut that you see of Master Yoda in Empire Strikes Back. There's like a little stovetop there, and there's some wood over there, and it's a little more high tech because there's like a computer there and some other things, and there was a whole Vinaya books there and other books there, and we talked about those books. And we talked about what plans I might have for the future, because there was now plans for me to start teaching. He said, I'm very happy that you're starting to teach. Oh, before that, how could I forget this one? This is a great one. So Bhante said, I want you to do a Dhamma talk here at Dhamma Sukha. I said, yeah, that'd be great. Which one do you want me to do one? He said, can you do one in dependent origination? I said, yeah, sure. And I said, how about Majjhima Nikaya 9? And he said, yeah, that'd be great. And so at the end of the interview, he said, okay, you're going to be up for the Dhamma talk now. I said, okay. And I came into the Dhamma hall expecting that the chair would be over here, for him to sit, and we would be talking together. But no, I see David keeping the chair over there, and I said, what's going on? Again, he threw another, fastball at me. And I said, okay, that's cool. So he came in, he sat, I bowed to him, and then I came and I sat in this place, and I started talking. And while I was talking about the different Majjhima Nikaya 9, the one that we did a few days ago. And he was listening very contently. For some time he was in the first jhana. For some time he was sleeping. For some time he was listening. And for some time again he was in the first jhana. But he was listening very intently. And that talk lasted for a little while, and I talked about different similes. And one of the things he said was, you have a tendency to talk about computers a lot. Anyway, I gave that talk, and he went back down in his mule, and I walked down. And the next day we had a chance to talk, because it was just before the interviews. He said, your talk was very good. You just didn't have enough stories in them. You have to have more stories. And that was what he was always on about. You have to have more stories, more jokes in your Dhamma talks. and he made me understand why. He said, because you're talking about very profound things, and you need to give them the space to kind of understand what you're saying. And so you divert their attention with a joke or with a story, so that the mind has time to process what it just listened to. It made a lot of sense. And that was in 2021 that I last saw him. And so after that, after that talk, after those interviews, on the last few days before I was supposed to leave, I went into his cabin and we talked about all of the different books that he had. And he said, you have to be very careful now. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're going to be doing these retreats, and they're very tiring. So make sure you take enough breaks. Right? So he was mentoring me the whole time, and he said, I'm really happy that you're going to be doing these retreats, and I want you to keep doing them, and you have my full support. And I want you to come back. and spend the rains retreat here and do some more study and we'll talk and everything. I said, yeah, that would be great. That would be wonderful. So I went back to Cambodia, and I think that was when he read Mind Without Craving, the draft of Mind Without Craving. And he had a lot of notes. Like, he had a lot of notes, and he was like pretty emphatic about those notes to David, and he was like, no, it can't be this, it shouldn't be this, it shouldn't be that. And David was like, Bhante wants to get on a Zoom call with you to talk about these things. I said, sure, what's the best time? And we finally decided when. And I think David was expecting Bhante to start with the whole critique about, like, this is where you went wrong, this is completely wrong here, fix this, you got to rewrite that. But no, he was like, so how you doing? What's going on? And we never talked about the notes. Ultimately, David was the one who had to fix them. But that was when I asked Bhante, could you give me a name? And could I use this title, Dharmacharya? And he said, yeah, that'd be fine. It's like, it's a respected title, and that's okay as a Dhamma teacher. And he gave me the name Sobhana, because he was good friends with a monk named Sobhana. And Sobhana, means brilliant light. And I found out that it was actually, he told me, it was the name of Mahasi Sayadaw. So I found it very wonderful that he gave me that name. And so later on, we started to see that Bhante was starting to get into decline. This was just before my father passed away, that he was starting to get into a little bit of a decline in his faculties. And then my father passed away, and then I did the Easter retreat. I had to go to India and do all these things. I did the Easter retreat. And we had what was called at the time TwimCon. This was actually last year, right, David? Yeah. And this was TwimCon. And at the time, Bhante's health was starting to get into decline. And I came to TwimCon. We had shared some great stories about Bhante. We saw Bhante's baby photo. That was great. He looks just like Bhante. And I remember going down to the cabin. He called me. It was cold that night, that evening. He called me down to the cabin. He said, Delson, come here. And I went inside. And he said, it's getting really cold. I want you to go and light the fire. I said, Bhante, I don't know how to light a fire. Like, how do I do that? He said, I am a teacher, aren't I? I'll show you. Just walk through with me. So he said, you take the wood, and you do this and this and that, and then you take the kindling, and you light the match, and you do that. And I luckily didn't burn the cabin down. And we spent some time talking about this or that, and he was still, again, his mind was a little bit in decline at the time for whatever medical reasons. But he was, again, still the soft, gentle teddy bear all throughout that time. And then I remember this was at some point later during TwimCon where he had a fall, and we all went down to see him. He was doing okay, he was all right, but still not so well. And then finally, at some point, he had to be transported to the hospital. And he went out in style. It was amazing, because there was a chopper that came down, and he was basically resting. Everybody was sending him loving kindness throughout that time. And he went into the chopper, and we just saw Bhante just go on, out into the sky towards St. Louis. And after that, then we did some retreats. I left Dhamma Sukha again. And then retreats went on with David and Drew and so on. And I kept getting updates from David about Bhante's health, how he's doing, what's going on. And then he was, not doing so well for a while, and he had to go to the hospital. And this is while I was in India, and we thought maybe this was it. This was going to be it. So I said, I want to see Bhante. Is it possible if I can have a call with him, FaceTime with him? And it was so funny because he was in the hospital bed, and he was eating chips. I was like, how are you doing, Bhante? And he's like, they're starving me while he's eating chips. And then again, he said, and he looked at me right through the camera, and he said, so, are you going to become a monk? And I said, Bhante, well, this, that, and all that. And like he said, that's not an answer. Yes or no, are you going to become a monk? I didn't know how to answer. I just, and then David was like, all right, we have to go and all of that. But that was when I saw Bhante, really in pretty bad shape at that point in time. And then later on, he went back to St. Joe's, and he was okay for a while. And, we visited him once in a while, and David visited him more often, of course. And when I went to see him in St. Joe's, and I had a chance to go and talk to him, he would ask me, so, how's your mom doing? How's your sister doing? Because and he said, how's your dad doing? And I realized he was kind of in mental decline, didn't realize. And the one thing he wanted me to do, he said, I want you to go and develop this faculty, right? So that you can spend as much time as you can at Dhamma Sukha, while also taking care of your mother in India. I want you to be in two places at the same time. So I said, okay. I mean, what else could you say? Because if you say but, or if you say I'll try, no, can't say that. I just said, okay. And every time I saw him, so have you developed that ability to go at two places at the same time? No, not yet. Well, work on it. Keep working on it. And he was very much, while he was at St. Joe's, very peaceful, actually, for the most part. For a moment we thought really like he lost his mental faculties or he was in mental decline. But then once he started to see, Bhante Satyananda, Bhante Kusala, he saw, what's going on with the retreat center, his mind started getting uplifted again. He started getting reminded of the Dhamma again. When they did the Pali chanting, his mind was uplifted with that as well. And this year when I went to go see him, he was actually much better. His mood was better, his mind was better. And we were talking, and I told him, we're going to be doing, here, I remember this. I told him, so what have you been up to? He asked me, and I said, we went to Bodh Gaya, and we went to these places. We went to Kushinagar and all of this, and I actually got to do a Dhamma talk right in front of the tree, talking about the night of the Buddha's awakening, and then the Metta Sutta. And he looked at me and he said, "Good for you." He was so happy, so uplifted. And I think that really, warmed up his inclination back to the Dhamma, right? For a while we were thinking what was going to happen. Like, did he forget the Dhamma? Did he forget what was going on? But his mind started inclining back again to the Dhamma. And, then I told him about the Dependent Origination Symposium. And I told him, we're going to be doing about 4 or 5 days of just talking about dependent origination. So do you have any suggestions of what I should focus on? Because we wanted to get an understanding of where his clarity of Dhamma was. And all he said was, just use your intuition. And that was the answer, his answer, standard answer for me all the time. Even when we were at Chico's one time, I was like, I'm going to be doing this retreat in Europe, so is there anything I should look out for? And he just said, just use your intuition. He didn't really give a lot of direction. And that was okay, because I understood. So I asked him, well, was there anything in particular I should talk about in independent origination? He said, no, just talk about this, or, just use your intuition. You'll know what to say. So we had the dependent origination symposium. It went really well. And we came back, we saw him again. We bought him the t-shirt from the dependent origination symposium. He wore that, and he was so happy. He was so uplifted from that. We showed him, this is the self to be let go, and this is the not self to be recognized. And he wore that t-shirt, and he was very happy. And then later on, actually, I think we showed one of his Dhamma talks, and he was very uplifted about that. He also wanted a Bigfoot outside the Dhamma hall. Wanted a big cutout of that. And so he would keep asking Kirsten about it. She'll tell you more about that when she talks about it. So, he was still a kid at heart, if you think about it. For those of you who've gone down to the monastic area, it's less of a monastic area and more like a playground. Right? It's got a big dinosaur over there, and it's got some horses. There used to be one horse. There used to be 2 elephants there. Now they've been brought up over there. So, he was really a kid at heart. And, then he really went into decline. I mean, he lost a lot of weight. We saw him the last time, and he lost a lot of weight. And that was when we started thinking, yeah, it's probably time soon. At least in my mind, I was thinking, yeah, it's time for him to go soon. And so he had to be taken to the hospital. And so this is in the last few days that this happened. He had to be taken into the hospital. And what were the chances that we had 2 bhikkhus over here for this retreat who could go and visit him, and along with Venerable Basa, to chant with him and read 143, Majjhima Nikaya 143. When that happened, when they did that, his mind really became uplifted. Now his mind was totally inclined for the Dhamma. And the next day, I went to read 148. That is the 6 sets of 6. And that's a very powerful sutta. And you could tell in Bhante, I mean, he was basically in and out of consciousness, it seemed. But when he was listening to 148, he was very, very, concentrated on what was being said. You could tell. And after that, then Bhante Kusala talked to him, and he responded, and we gave him some water, stayed there for a while. We were all, making him relax, sending him loving kindness. And, when you reflect on this, it's just amazing karma on Bhante's part. You might have come across his stories about when he was much younger, when he would spend time at the hospice, and he would spend time with people who were dying. And he wouldn't have to even read 143. If they were Christian, he would read from the Bible or any other text, just to uplift their mind and see the smile on their faces. And so he was such a being that he was so in tune with what happens during the dying process. He gave me this book to read. The last time I saw him here in Dhammasukha while he was still here, it was called Who Dies by Stephen Levine. And he said, read this book. It's an amazing book. And this is where I found the development of the forgiveness practice. So, and he'd been doing forgiveness practice for 2 years, right, straight, while he was in Hawaii. So I read the book. It was wonderful. I gave it to my mother because she was still grieving after my dad's passing, and it really helped her. And Bhante was so in tune with how to die because he'd been helping other people through that process. And the karma of doing that, of uplifting people's minds and allowing them to let go, was such that in his final moments, or prior to his final moments, he had this amazing merit that 2 monks came, along with Venerable Basa, 3 monks came to chant with him and uplift his mind. He had a chance to listen to the Dhamma again. He had a chance to listen to 143, which he often did, and 148, which he highly praised. And, I feel very, very privileged that I was able to do that for him. And it really uplifted him. It took him to the next level. His mind had a different experience after that. And that was when his physical faculties were now on the decline. Really, really on the decline. Because it was only a matter of days, really just a couple of days when we think about it. And, last night, the people left, and so we don't really know what time he passed, what time his physical faculties started to decline to the point of never arising again. But everybody felt something around 12:30 or 1 in the morning. I didn't go to sleep until about 1 or 1:30 because I felt this radiant energy. Other people here also felt that, and it was beautiful and wonderful. And he was just letting everyone know it's okay, everything is fine, everything is good. So the next morning, today morning, we had a chance to go and do some ceremonies for him. And that was amazing because while that was going on, his life force was still there in terms of his mentality. So he was not fully gone yet. His physical faculties were gone. He was just a corpse. But his mentality, was still there. And, Bhante Kusala and Bhante Samhita and Venerable Basa did the chanting. And we went through dependent origination, the arising and the cessation aspects of dependent origination in Pali. And while that was going on, his mind completely let go. And in that moment, I felt a rush of energy. Just my mind was like, wow. And I smiled. I was so happy for him because he completely let go and he was gone. In that moment, he was gone. In that moment, that was not Bhante anymore. It was just the 4 great elements. And so after that ceremony was done, we offered water to represent the overflow of merits. We shared our merits with him. And we left. And that's when I told everybody in the car, Bhante went to Aviha. Aviha is the plane of one of the first planes of the pure abodes. He went from becoming an anagami and attained arhatship in Aviha. And he will come and visit every one of his students from time to time. He'll test you. Poke around, see how you're smiling, how your mindfulness is. So Bhante is not Bhante anymore. He's happy and liberated. Let's share some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.